Hello gang, welcome. This is Chapter 5 and congratulations, you are now halfway done with the material for this semester. And we're going to be moving now into cost behavior for both analysis and use in business functions. First thing we're going to do in Chapter 5 though is just review some of the concepts that we actually learned back in Chapter 1, and that's really how fixed and variable costs behave and how we can use them to predict our total costs in any business scenario. So let's start first with variable costs, and we're going to take a look at variable costs in total. And the way that works is total variable cost is proportional to the activity level within a relevant range. What that means in simple terms is as activity increases, so does total variable cost. Let's take a look at it on a graph, on a chart here. The example I'm going to use for us is we are manufacturing chocolate chunk cookies, which I've pictured here and will probably make you as hungry as they make me. But let's assume that that is what we manufacture, right? We bake cookies, right? We take raw materials, which is flour, sugar, eggs, butter, chocolate chunks, of course, and we manufacture them and turn them into something greater, into these lovely, delicious chocolate chip cookies, which of course take direct labor, right? The bakers who are mixing this stuff up and putting them in the oven, and of course a lot of overhead for our manufacturing. That would be things like renting our kitchen, all the equipment maintenance that we're going to have, the equipment depreciation on them, electricity to light the place, and electricity to cool the place, as well as potentially some additional staff, some cleaning staff that may come in and work on our place. All those things that we learned, which would be manufacturing overhead, also go into our costs. But we're going to start with a simple one, with a true variable cost. If we were baking cookies, we're going to assume that each of our cookies takes 10 cents worth of chocolate chunks. That's how much goes into each one of our cookies. That, of course, chocolate chunk would, or our chocolate cost, would be an example of a true variable cost, and it shows it here on this graph. What it means is, if we make or bake 0 cookies in 1 month, well, then our cost, our total cost of chocolate that we use this month would also be 0. However, if instead we bake 500 cookies, then the total cost would be 500 times 10 cents. Total chocolate cost alone would be $50, and so on. And it's got this very linear relationship between the amount of activity, meaning the number of cookies that we manufacture, is directly proportional to the total cost of chocolate, right? If we were to bake 1,000 chocolate chunk cookies, then our total cost would be $100 for chocolate alone. Same thing, as we bake 2,000 cookies, then our total cost would be $200. So our total chocolate cost goes up proportional to the total number of cookies that we bake. That's an example of a true variable cost. And that's, remember, in total. Our total cost goes up based on activity. A variable cost, on the other hand, on a per unit level, a true variable cost remains the exact same over a wide range of activity. Let's take a look at what I mean there. That can be shown graphically as well as follows. It's still a linear equation, but it stays exactly the same. So if we were to bake 0 cookies, of course we would have 0 cost, but anything else in the relevant range here, and that's all the way up to 5,000 cookies. Doesn't matter if we make 1,000 cookies, or it doesn't matter if we bake 5,000 cookies. The cost per unit, the cost per cookie of chocolate would still be 10 cents, right? So we're still going to have 10 cents worth of cookies in our first cookie, and we're going to have 10 cents of chocolate in our 5,000th cookie. Doesn't matter, on a per unit level, variable costs stay the same. Here's some examples of variable costs. In a manufacturing company like ours, of course, direct materials, right? Our chocolate would be an example of a variable cost. Direct labor would also be the labor costs, or the salaries or wages that we're paying our direct laborers, right? Those would be direct variable costs. And of course, manufacturing overhead, but only the variable component. And there's going to be both variable and fixed manufacturing overhead components, which we'll get into in just a bit. Merchandising and manufacturing companies might have something like sales commissions, right? If we're paying a salesperson a specific amount every time they make a sale, that would of course be a true variable cost. Shipping costs, some clerical costs. One of the things that I do want you to be aware of here is cost of goods sold is a variable expense, not a cost, and the name can be a little confusing. We'll talk about that more in just a bit. Actually, let's talk about it now. Cost of goods sold is a variable expense, not a cost. And what that means is it doesn't matter how much we manufacture, that doesn't affect cost of goods sold, right? What matters to us, what makes something a cost of goods sold or an inventory expense, is the amount that we sell. So it's variable with respect to the amount we sell. It's a bit of a unique one, and that will come in handy in the next chapter, not in this one. So moving back to types of cost behavior, a fixed cost behaves almost the opposite way that a variable cost does. Let's start with in total a fixed cost. A total fixed cost remains the same even when the activity level changes. Let me show you what I mean with first a real-world example that you guys might be familiar with. Like your cable bill, right? If it's like yours, it's exorbitant, but let's just say your cable bill is $100 a month. And by the way, take pay-per-view and all those extra things you can pay for out of the equation, because those might be more akin to a variable cost. Let's just say you don't have any of that pay-per-view, no on-demand, none of that. Good old-fashioned cable where you pay $100 a month. Your cable bill would be a fixed cost if that were the example. And it doesn't matter how many times you watch Justin Bieber in concert on your television, right? Your bill isn't going to go up and it's not going to go down. It's going to stay the same no matter what the activity level is, right? It's $100 whether you turn the TV on and watch 100 shows or whether you never turn your TV on for the month. Let's keep it into our manufacturing example though, right, where we're still baking our cookies. It would look exactly the same with something like rent. If we were renting our kitchen, that would be a great example of a true fixed cost, right? And in our example, let's assume that we rent our kitchen or our manufacturing facility for $1,000, right? Doesn't matter if we bake 100 cookies, doesn't matter if we bake 1,000 cookies. Our total rent cost for that period is going to be $1,000. And this is where it differs and is exactly opposite of a variable cost. Variable cost, total variable cost, increases proportionally with activity. Total fixed cost does not change regardless of activity. And finally, that brings us to fixed cost on a per unit basis. And this also behaves almost inversely to variable costs, whereas fixed costs on a per unit level goes down the more activity we have. So jumping back to your Justin Bieber and cable bill, right? If you're paying $100 a month, the more TV shows you watch, well, the less you are paying for each individual show. And what I mean is, if you pay $100 a month for your cable bill and you watch one show, well, guess what? You paid $100 to watch that one show. But instead, if you were to watch 100 shows, then you're only paying $1 per show. So on a per unit basis, the more you watch, the lower your fixed cost per unit is. Let's bring that right back to our manufacturing of cookies example. Let's assume still we're paying $1,000 in rent for our kitchen or our manufacturing facility. If we bake only one cookie, well, guess what? We have to attribute $1,000 of rent to that one cookie. Yeah, pretty expensive cookie. I was thinking the same thing. But if we double our production and we bake 2 cookies that month, well, all of a sudden we've cut it in half. Now it's only $500 per cookie, right? Not too much. Even if we make 10 cookies, we've brought it down. Our per unit cost down to $100, right? And of course, if we wanted to run a profitable business, we'd want to bake a whole lot more cookies, so I've made it a little more reasonable here. But assuming we are still paying $1,000 of rent, right, total, our rent cost per unit, if we were to make, say, 10,000 cookies, all of a sudden now it's only 10 cents per cookie of the rent that we would be attributing to each cookie. So hopefully this demonstrates it well. This is the type of curve that is going to have, right, if you were to put it graphically, a fixed cost, in that the more activity increases, the lower your per unit fixed cost will be. Now, what we're going to be dealing with, and what we deal with often in the real world, are mixed cost. And a mixed cost has both a fixed and a variable component. And I've shown it graphically here, right, where we saw a total fixed cost has this sort of linear graphical representation, right, where it's almost a perfect horizontal line, and a variable cost has that upward sloping relationship to show that as activity increases, total cost increases, right? Fixed cost remains the same, variable cost increases with activity. It can be shown graphically here, and one of the examples that I put here is for you to consider, let's say, utility costs, right? And if you've ever bothered to take a look at your electricity bill, I have. I'm not sure who else does. I think it brings pain for us to look at it. But if you take a look, there's actually two types of charges there. There's a fixed component, right, just for having an account with the electric company and for having access to electricity, meaning if you turn on a light switch, your light's going to turn on. You pay for that. You pay for an access fee. Some amount, it could be $5, $20, depending on where you live, that you will pay an access fee. Then there's also a variable component, right? The more you use, the more your bill will be, right? We may think it's a purely variable one, but if you take a look, you'll see access fees and other fixed amounts that you will be charged no matter what. If you were to turn off all the circuit breakers and turn everything off in your home, you would still get an electric bill. Granted, it would be low, but you would still get one, and that is the fixed portion. And in the real world, especially in a manufacturing company, mixed costs are generally going to be what we are seeing. So, what I've put here, this slide, is of course one that I'm highlighting and saying memorize, because we can actually use this equation that's listed here to represent and actually predict what total mixed costs will be in the future. And I want to take a moment and just explain what this means. And I know nightmares of algebra are coming back, but it's not going to be too complicated of algebra, I promise you. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it is, these elements. First, we're trying to take a look at what the total cost is we're going to be predicting for the future, right? And our total cost is represented by Y. That would be the total mixed cost. That includes both the fixed component and the variable component. And it's represented here, of course. A is the fixed costs plus our variable cost, which is B, variable cost per unit multiplied by the number of units or the activity level that we have during the period. So let's take a look at an example. Let's presume that our cell phone bill has a charge for $40, and that would be the fixed amount. Whether we use our cell phone or we don't use it at all during the month, we have to pay $40. And if you send a text message, it costs 3 cents per text message, okay? And let's assume that your monthly activity level is going to be 2,000 texts, which we will plug in just a bit. But first, let's start with those two components, right? The fixed component of $40 a month, plus the variable. If you decide to send a text message, it is 3 cents per text message. Unlimited phone calls with the $40, but text messages cost you 3 cents each. Let's go ahead and plug those in, right? Where A is the fixed component and B is the variable cost per unit. So total fixed cost, variable cost per unit is B. Plugging those in, very simple, right? The fixed portion, and the variable cost per unit. And now, remember, where X represents the activity, you could plug in any number, right? If we wanted to posit, hey, next month, I think I'm going to send 2,000 text message. Well, real simple to just plug in the 2,000 into that X, and you know exactly what your bill is going to be next month, right? Just do that simple multiplication and addition. That's as complicated as the mathematics are getting here so far. $100 a month, you can very easily predict things. And that comes in key, maybe not so much with our cell phone bills, but if we were running a manufacturing company, then it can come in huge. So let's take a look at that graphically. If we took that equation that we just figured out, this is what it would look like on a graph. And I want you to pay real close attention here. Notice that when we plot these things on a graph or a chart in any way, shape, or form, of course, we'll have that same sort of relationship with that upward slope to show that there is a variable component. But also notice that wherever that line intersects the y-axis, remember that's the one that goes up and down, wherever it intersects, that represents the fixed cost, right? And the rest of that is your variable cost going up from there. All right, and we'll end video 1 here, and we'll start the next video with actually using a scatter graph to plot and diagnose cost behavior. We'll see you then in video 2.